Welcome back to the PCC podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the entire world, and that is the messy middle, aka nuance. And this is something that the fitness industry loves to ignore, and that's why I love to go deeper into it. So, we're going to be talking about specifically the time where most people quit. The messy middle, the underestimated hardest part of the journey. I think a lot of people think that maybe that's the beginning. It's not. It's the middle. So let's talk about what that is. It's when people realize that the behaviors that they are doing are not moving them towards their goals, are sabotaging themselves, are the wrong behaviors, but you can't change it yet because you haven't figured out how. And a lot of people are stuck here in this area of awareness. It's really frustrating, and it's arguably more frustrating to see yourself do the dysfunctional behavior and not be able to change it, because it's like you're watching it in real time in an out-of-body experience, and you're not able to redirect your behaviors because it isn't that simple. And so this episode is going to be on what does it actually look like to create behavior change and what actually gets you through the hardest part. And I'll give you a spoiler, and we're going to talk through every single piece of this. It's managing your thoughts, emotions, and therefore actions throughout the process, and consistently learning how to reorient yourself and reinforce the tiny, tiny victories along the way, even when it doesn't feel like a full victory yet. You're probably like, what the heck do you mean? I'm going to explain what I mean. But first, if you are not already subscribed to the podcast, if you already are listening to these episodes and you love the neuroscience, you love the behavior change, you love the nitty-gritty details, and you haven't subscribed yet, I just want to ask you to do that, please, because it does take 2 seconds and it also helps us spread the show to more people who need it. So, all right, let's talk through this. So we often look at this from a situation of I'm struggling with emotional eating. I'm struggling with skipping the gym. I'm struggling with, I should be making the healthy choice, but I'm not. I should be staying out of the pantry, but I'm not. And so again, when we're in this, we're watching this happen in real time. This is when most people want to quit. The solution is remembering that you're actually one step closer to victory when you're experiencing this happen. So I'm going to paint you a timeline here for you to understand what's actually going on. So everyone starts in ignorance of, I don't understand where I'm going wrong. This is honestly where a lot of women feel like they're like, oh, I feel like I'm doing everything right, but I'm not seeing results. And we just kind of live in this ignorance of, I feel like I'm putting in a lot of effort. I feel like my body should be changing, and it's not. And then something happens to where they either maybe watch a video of mine on Instagram, or they take the step to work with my team and I as coaches. And the first thing that we focus on with our clients is awareness and mindfulness. So without changing a thing, we focus on, let's pay attention. Let's tune in. Let's actually see what's going on by using certain tools to create visibility around our habits and our nutrition to see, what does the actual consistency look like? And the crazy thing that happens is when you start doing things like logging your food, tracking your habits, tracking your behaviors, tracking your consistency, you start to see that you're not as consistent as you thought. And I can say this even from myself. I've been doing this with my time actually in the past 2 weeks. Every quarter I do what's called a time study, where I audit all of my time and I see where it's going. And even myself, I feel like, oh, I work so much. I work so hard. Where is all my time going? And then I log it and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of bathroom breaks where I'm just scrolling for too long. So awareness is key. And then once we have that awareness breakthrough, we're seeing where, wow, I thought I was eating really healthy, but actually like the donuts that they put out at work that I had one, or the Halloween candy that was sitting out that I've been munching on, or things like that, that I now realize that I am eating, Now I feel bad about it because I'm seeing that and I haven't been able to change it yet. That's the frustrating part. That's where we want to say, screw it. I already suck at this. I already messed up. I might as well quit. And then when we start to implement behavior changes and habits of like, okay, let's work on increasing this food source, that food source, switching these habits, switching these changes, and we don't do them perfectly, that's where the messy middle comes in, is we deal with these feelings of shame and guilt and frustration because we're not doing it perfectly like we thought we could. Now, I want to be very clear. You are a human being. You will make mistakes. You have patterns ingrained in you that are very long lasting, that are not going to change overnight. And you know this. You could say that out loud to yourself, but it's different when you're experiencing it, right? And so it's important to recognize that the next step on the timeline was going from ignorance to awareness. So that's actually a step forward. And then watching the specific habits that you want to change not be changing in real time. That is the next step. Okay. And then from there, how do we actually go from that to changing our behavior? I think most of us tend to think, well, I just need to, it's just as simple as a choice. I just need to change. I just need to do it. I just need to have more willpower. I just need to have more discipline. And this is the wrong line of thinking. And in fact, it's the exact opposite thing that's going to get you the results that you want. The thing that's going to get you the results that you want is called self-compassion. And that's going to be really hard for a lot of you to swallow because when you hear the words self-compassion, a couple of things come up. How could being nice to myself get me any sort of results? Whenever I'm nice to myself, I equate that with complacency. I equate that with laziness. I equate that with letting myself off the hook. And that is exactly why we need to rewire. Okay. Because what you have been doing is beating yourself up to a pulp every time you make a mistake, which reinforces guilt, which reinforces shame, which reinforces, I just need to try harder. And then we keep doing it. We don't change a thing, and we just have a worse and worse and worse self-concept. What we need here, the pattern interrupt, is self-compassion, which is not complacency. It is not laziness. It is not letting yourself off the hook. It is forgiving yourself for what has already happened that you can't change. That's it. And self-compassion is actually more congruent in its actual definition with holding yourself to a higher standard than most people realize because of society, because we're in a society of, oh, be kind to yourself. Everyone's accepted for any reason. And I love the inclusivity of it all, but we're getting soft at the same time, right? We're getting soft and we're saying everything's okay, right? Even neglecting your own standards. And that is not okay. Okay. So self-compassion, what does that actually look like? It means when I make the mistake of not doing the behavior that I want to change, then I say, well, that happened. I'm going to forgive myself and I'm going to reorient to, well, what can I do now that's more in alignment with the person that I want to become? Because if we are holding on to resentment, guilt, and frustration, we can't have productive, forward-thinking thoughts. We're living in the past. We're living in anxiety. We're living in stress. But if we forgive ourselves, we can have a neutral mentality around, well, what can I do, right? And when we forgive ourselves, we shorten the time frame from when we make the mistake to when we get back on track. Let me say that one more time. When we forgive ourselves, this is the shortcut to shorten the timeline between when you make the mistake and when you get back on track, because you're able to make a decision out of your values rather than the inciting situation, right? When you make a decision based on the inciting situation, you're making a decision based on guilt, shame. That's going to look like giving up, saying screw it, saying I'll start over Monday, or it's going to look like overcompensating, which is going to lead to more problems, right? Neither of those are productive, but forgiveness will lead you to a blank slate, right? And from a blank slate, you can take productive actions. And when you shorten the gap between when you spiral or when you have the bad decision and when you start over, you're able to insert more productive decisions and build a better self-concept. Okay. And then the big picture of this is, how do we actually change the behavior? Is we need to reinforce every single time that we do the productive behavior, even if it's not the majority of the time, and even if it's a tiny win in a sea full of losses, because that's what it will look like. So I use the extreme example of, if you are binge drinking 7 nights a week. Now, obviously, I don't think most of the people listening to this are doing that, but I use it for sake of hyperbole. If you're binge drinking, let's say 10 drinks a night for 7 nights a week, that is 70 drinks a week. If you remove one night and you go sober for one night, or you remove, let's say, a couple of drinks from a couple of nights, and you bring that down to 60 total drinks for the week, does this person's quality of life get better? If we're being totally honest, no, right? It does not get better. They still have a lot of work to do. But if we celebrate that win, if we say, I made an improvement, so I'm going to give myself the credit for it, even if it is small and even if I'm not where I want to be yet, that is how we progress. And that is called giving yourself credit. It's called not downplaying those small things, because if you allow that to be a win, you can build momentum. And when you have momentum, 60 drinks can turn into 50, and 50 can turn into 40, 40 to 30, 30 to 20, 20 to 10. And when that person's drinking 10 to 20 drinks a week, their quality of life is going to be better. They will have better results. They will feel better, right? And the same goes for you with the cookie, or missing your macros, or not hitting your steps. So if you're hitting 1,200 steps a day because you're super sedentary, your life's super busy, and you give yourself the credit of, well, 5 days this week I got above 3,000, even though that's not my end goal, it's better, then that's momentum. You can build from that. You cannot build from self-deprecation. Okay. And so that's the messy middle, is forgiving yourself over and over and over again, and celebrating every tiny win along the way, even when it doesn't look like a full victory yet. And that's really hard to do when your entire life you have trained yourself on perfectionism, all or nothing thinking, and it doesn't count if it's not perfect, right? So this is the hard work. So that's one aspect of the messy middle that I wanted to cover today. I hope it resonated with you, because it's one of my favorite topics to teach clients on and bring them through. This is why, even though you're typically a pretty competent person, competent woman in your life, this is why people reach out to us for help, is because it's not the actual thing to do that's hard. It's all of this in between shit, right? Now, another way that we like to look at this is when someone is working on behavior change in the bigger picture. So that's kind of in the micro of, like, I'm changing one habit. That process might happen over the course of a month, couple months. But in the big picture, we have instances where people make a lot of progress over 6 months, 12 months, and then they have a situation where they backslide. I had a client who works in her local election, and it was just, election day, and she was super, super busy and stressed for that deadline. Another one of my clients went on a really long vacation. Another one of my clients has been dealing with some mental health issues. And in all of these situations, they came to me saying, I just feel like I've backslid. I just feel like I'm slipping. Like, I made all these habits and I feel like I'm just losing traction on all of them. And the way that we like to anchor this is, number one, everything I'm about to say does not mean that we lower our standards, but we do need to meet ourselves where we are to get those standards back up, right? So what I look at is, when this person started working with us, where was their actual baseline? Meaning, when shit hit the fan, when they had a week like that the prior time, like the last election year, or their last mental health episode, or the last time they traveled, what did it look like for them then? And we like to think of this as, like, when shit hits the fan, what do you default to? Because you don't rise to the occasion in these situations. You default to the level of your conditioning and your training. And so I call this your baseline. And every single time I do this, I get to see that this client's baseline has risen drastically, meaning that even though they feel like they've backslid, they're maintaining so many more habits that they've put into place versus the prior version of themselves. What they're focused on is the lack. What I'm focused on is the gain, right? And so they say, I feel like I'm slipping, but they also haven't regained weight. They're just maintaining. They're just not losing. Or they feel like they're slipping, but they're still able to check off half the boxes every day rather than all of them, but not none of them. And the boxes that they're checking are habits beyond what they started with working on. So I remind them of this, right? Because in the bigger picture, if your baseline is rising over time, that's also a sign of behavior change because it takes a lot of time to build habits. I'm going to talk about that next. But when your baseline increases, it shows that your default behaviors have risen to a higher standard. And the reality of lasting progress is that it's a lot less dictated by where your ceiling is and a lot more dictated by where your floor is, where the baseline is. How low does that get when shit hits the fan? How much do you say screw it to? How much all or nothing thinking are we letting in? And that's where the progress happens. Now, with that being said, right, we talked about it takes some time to build habits. I really, really disagree with the fact that it takes 21 days to build a habit. Habits are easier to put into place, harder to sustain. So depends how we're defining things. But there's actually been research to show that habits tend to get stale after about 6 months. And the same things that you might have been on fire for when you got started now may feel very forced and lackluster 6, 7, 8 months in. That's not an issue with the habit. I see so many people say, well, I was doing this for like 6 months and then it just stopped working. It didn't stop working. It got harder because it got stale. And that's where habit change actually starts happening. So people say it takes 21 days to build a habit. I think that's bullshit. You can build a habit, AKA do the trial and error to like fit it into your routine and your schedule in 21 days. But I would say you need to be sustaining these habits for at least 6 months past the 6-month point through the thick and the thin of life to actually say that a habit is solidified. Why do I say that? And why is that actually grounded in neuroscience? Because of the concept of neuroplasticity, AKA your brain can change its pathways in adulthood. You can change the pathways of how your brain is wired. But when it comes to the behaviors that feel automatic, you need to consider what you're working against. Your brain's not this blank slate that you can just draw a new path on and it'll stick. The behavior you're trying to change is a groove that's been whittled into your brain for however many years that you've been doing the bad habit. So when you're rerouting that, you will need just as many salient reps as what it took to build the habit, and recognize that you will slip up in the process because that groove is really deep. Not because you lack willpower, but because your default system is set to old settings. So what is salient reps? Meaning reps that you acknowledge, reps that you reinforce mentally. This is why celebrating the wins is important. Salient means like noticeable. Salient means memorable, right? Emotive. Salient in a neuroscience definition is, right, if I have a very traumatic event in my life, it's salient because it's highly emotionally charged. My brain's going to impact that into my brain a little bit more heavily and faster versus something that's not salient, like me picking this up right now. I'm not going to remember this in a week, right? So that's not salient. And so when we have a win, the reason why it's important that we celebrate it is because we need to make these things salient in our mind, memorable in our mind, so that the groove actually gets rerouted, right? Because the reality is, when you do this, I see people change their life, their body, their identity in a matter of like 1 to 3 years. I wanted to say 2 to 3 years because I think that's actually more realistic. And the people that are the most successful are the ones that consistently learn how to give themselves credit. I think that there's a reason why people who have really impressive lasting weight loss post about it, make a fitness Instagram, and like really hold themselves accountable to that degree, because they are holding themselves accountable. They're also giving themselves credit and reminding themselves of how far they've come, and they're making that emotionally and mentally salient. And honestly, 1, 2, 3 years, that's really impressive when you think about the fact that our clients that we work with, at least, are primary millennials, so 28 to 42 years old, who have struggled with weight or food since their early teens or younger, when the brain was actually forming and locking these patterns in. So it's actually really hard to rewire this. So the message here is, yes, when you notice that you are slipping on your habits, you have to give yourself grace. Forgiveness does not mean complacency, but forgiveness does mean a clean slate. And it also means that you need to double down on your efforts and focus on the fact that every single rep counts when it comes to your habit change. And if you are not reinforcing that and giving yourself credit, then it's going to make it hard for that to stick. So remember, you're on the right path, but you have to keep going, especially through the messy middle. I hope that this episode helped. I hope that this gave you some good thinking points and ways to implement this in your life today. And as always, subscribe to the podcast if you liked it. I would love for you to leave a rating and review as well if you liked it. It takes 2 seconds if you're not driving, and it helps us out a ton because this podcast is free for you to listen to. So thank you guys so much for listening. I know your attention is one of your most valuable resources that you could give us. So we'll see you back here in the next one.